Hi, welcome to another video in the video series by Horizant. In this video, we're going to be taking a look on the asset management concepts inside the Archibus product. We're going to be focusing mainly on the asset lifecycle console and how to use that in order to manage and facilitate your lifecycling of an asset inside the Archibus product. So as we're going to be taking a look at this, we're going to jump into an environment and take a look at how we do that in the Archibus product, specifically inside the Archibus 22.1 release of the product. I'm going to flip over to my environment now, and we're going to go and take a look at that. Alright, there we go. So I've now moved over into my Archibus environment, and we can take a look at the demonstration of the software on how to track your asset management lifecycle inside the product. Inside this aspect, we're going to be focusing on the domain of the asset management. Inside asset management, there's many different subsections which you can go into. I'm going to focus on the asset management subsection. Inside of there, I'm going to be focusing on a couple of different aspects, mainly the background data and the asset manager. Now, before we start diving into the actual life cycling of the assets that you track inside the software, you're going to want to take that step back and start thinking about how you're going to be able to classify your assets to begin with. So when you enter a new either equipment or a piece of furniture or any of those different assets and be able to bring them in, you're going to want to classify them. Now, what is an asset per se? Because therefore, you'll have to have an understanding of what your assets are, so you're going to come up with what classifications you have. Well, when starting to dive into the asset management component of Archibus in the asset manager section, starting to use the consoles, they start tracking assets such as properties, buildings, equipment, and furniture. Now, each one of these are optional items to track if you're interested in tracking them, but those are the aspects that those consoles have that capability of tracking. So when dealing with that, obviously the property and the building aren't going to have a lot of standards associated to them, but when you're talking about equipment and furniture, those are classification systems in which you're going to want to come up with categories for inside the product first. So let's take a look at some of these classification tables before we actually start taking a look at bringing the assets in and initiating that asset lifecycle as part of that process. So in order to do that, you can go into the asset management section in the background data. So I'm going to choose on background data inside of here, and this is where you start coming into some of these standard tables as well as the classifications table. So let's start at the top. We'll talk about equipment standards, furniture standards. Standards in a nutshell are essentially a description of that asset that you're actually going to track. Because a lot of the times, for example, let's take an equipment. It's a really good example where in a piece of equipment, it could just be a number in which you're tracking, an asset number with a barcode or just a number itself. That number doesn't mean anything to you unless you actually categorize it with a standard. So you're going to want to be able to come up with your standards first, and then come up with your assets second so that you can assign that asset to a standard. And that's where the standards tables comes into play. So inside of here, I've chosen the equipment standard. So there is an equipment standard and there is a furniture standard, one for each. In the equipment standards table, as you can see, there's a list of the different types of furniture, the equipment standards in this example, different types of equipment standards that you can have as examples inside of here. So as we flip through and start scanning through, you can start seeing some examples inside of here. So you can take, for example, maybe an exhaust fan might be a good example. Whereas I click on that exhaust fan, you can come up and be able to classify it as exhaust fan with a shortened description. It could be very simple. It could be EXF if you want to, something very simple. And then you have the full text description. You can come up with a much longer description inside of here. So again, it follows the same characteristics. The standard is the primary key, so you cannot duplicate that inside the table. So you're going to want to come up with unique values. And then be able to fill out the rest of the classification. So inside of here, there's a whole gamut of fields which allows you to be able to fill out corresponding to the standard itself. This is not to the equipment, but to a classification of standard. If we take a close look to a couple of the different fields, for example, equipment category, this is a free-flowing text field that allows you to type a value in. For example, HVAC, electrical, and so on and so forth. And then what this allows you to do is be able to view these standards with that category in case you're looking for all the HVAC components. So here, for example, you have the smart search in your lookups, and if you're looking for all the HVACs, you can actually just type in HVAC, and then hit enter in your smart search, and it finds all those HVAC standards for you. So if you're having something like a heating or cooling a piece of equipment, you can find all those different standards accordingly versus other types of equipment that you're tracking or other types of assets in which you're tracking. So that's a free-flowing text field. There is also a classification code. You can assign a classification code to either a standard or to the asset itself. You have the capability of doing both. So inside of here, it is a lookup list to the standards, to the classifications table, which we'll look at momentarily, and you can fill that out accordingly. After that, there's a whole gamut of description fields. These are all optional. Again, you can fill them out or not fill them out. For example, you have manufacturer and model number. This is a good conversation piece because a lot of clients say, how many pieces of equipment or how many equipment standards do we have or do we need inside the software? And really that comes up to you. If you take a look, if you start filling out manufacturer and model number, that means that every time that model number will change, you have to have a different equipment standard. So again, some clients do that. Some clients keep it very generic, where I just want to say, you know what, it's just an exhaust fan and it's not from Monsoon Air, and I can remove that, and then therefore it's just an exhaust fan. But again, depends on the granularity in which you need to go down to. If you do need to track manufacturer and model number, fill out your manufacturer, fill out your model number, and make sure you update the standard to delineate that it's from that manufacturer and from that model number. So again, that nomenclature comes into play when dealing with your equipment standard nomenclatures. So use that to your advantage. With height, depth, pretty self-explanatory. What's the size of the piece of equipment? It is optional. Standard price, cost to move. This might be good for reference. Standard price might be diving into if I have to buy a new one, what's the typical cost associated to it. Cost to move is more for move management, so it is optional. Area, how much footprint does it have? What's the amperage? What's the BTU? Size, capacity, power, phasing, voltage, and so on and so forth. So again, consumable aspects and tracking that to that standard. Years of life expectancy. How many years? Is it a 10-year replacement process for an exhaust fan typically, or that sort of aspect? Ability to load a picture. Again, browse to a picture if you want to take a picture of an exhaust fan for reference and deal with that sort of aspect. So again, you're going to want to come inside of here, be able to backfill your equipment standards. Again, go add new, add your equipment standards, start backfilling them all in before you start tracking or initiating your equipment inventory. Again, this concept will rinse and repeat for furniture as well, for furniture standards here as well. So be able to classify them first, and then you can start onboarding your inventory or your assets inside the software with the asset console as part of that. So that would be the first stepping stone. Again, filling out your standards is part of that. Once you have your standards filled out, another consideration you may want to take a look at is your classifications. So let's take a look at that. So down here we've got defined classifications. And inside of Archibus, we have the ability to track a CSI classification capability back to either a standard or a piece of an asset itself, like a piece of equipment. So the way that the CSI classifications work is that it's essentially a breakdown, a parent-child relationship breakdown of a numeric system for a classification of your different assets. Now, a lot of clients start taking a look at the industry standards out there. So here in North America, we pretty much have 3 standards that we typically follow. You've got the master format, the uni format, and the omni format are the 3 different ones that you have the capability of optionally following. Inside of Archibus, if you start trying to track your classifications to one of those governing bodies or standards, then you want to be able to make sure that this table is filled out based on that numeric sequence that classification has. And this example I think I have here on the screen is the master format example inside of here. So the idea is you have a parent-child relationship. As you keep breaking that parent-child relationship down, it comes out with a numeric system. So essentially a grouping based on a numbering system with a name associated to it. So before you start onboarding, if you do want to classify your assets into a classification system, make sure that this is filled out accordingly based on that classification system. So again, that would be a great a starting point for background data or background information accordingly. So again, standards, classifications, those would be key elements on initiation before you start your onboarding process. Once you have those filled out, Then you can flip out of the background information and then dive into the actual asset consoles that are available to you. So let's do that. So I'm going to go in to the Asset Manager section inside the navigation system, and there's a couple different consoles that are available to you here. I'm mainly going to focus on the Asset Lifecycle console, but as you can see, you have others. For example, the Asset Registration console, that's very helpful for onboarding. So if you have a lot of assets to onboard and you're just starting out, you might want to take a look at that Asset Registration console to help speed you up of that onboarding process. Then you're going to be able to maintain your assets in the Asset Lifecycle console. That's where we're going to focus most of our time on. And then if you want to, you can also take a look at the Asset Disposal console. This comes into if you have a disposal process in which you want to follow and be able to track your assets and where they are within their disposal process. There's the Asset Disposal console as well. So I'm going to focus on the Asset Lifecycle console because we can essentially do the onboarding and do the disposal process all inside that Asset Lifecycle console. So if you're following along, click on the Asset Lifecycle console and then be able to use the console itself. Once the console loads up, I'm just going to hide the navigation out of the way so we get it full screen and we get a lot more screen space. When it loads up into 3 different tabs. We've got the Asset Registry, the Lifecycle Management, and the Asset Optimization. So I'm going to go through each one of the different tabs, explain each one out as part of the workflow. Let's start with the Asset Registry. In the Asset Registry tab, it essentially allows you to be able to onboard your assets, be able to register them inside the Archibus product so then you can start maintaining them accordingly. Now, in order to do that, you essentially need to get the panels loaded up below. You'll notice that the filter loads up right away. If you have the GIS capability turned on with the Esri integration, that loads up there as well inside the mapping tool. Now, the idea with this dialog or with this tab is you may have a lot of assets inside the software already, and therefore you may have to set a restriction or a filter across the top, and therefore it doesn't load the data initially in order to speed up that process. So if you don't have any right off the get-go, you can just hit the filter button and then it loads the panels down below. So I'm going to start with that, and we'll come back to that filter in a little bit once we learn how to add a new asset accordingly. Once I hit that filter button, you'll notice that the Asset Registry, the Asset Summary by Types panels start loading up and are available to us now. They're no longer empty at that point. Now, if you're loading it up for the very first time and you have no assets inside the software, your Asset Registry panel will be empty and you need to onboard those new assets. Now, how do you do that? Well, over the right-hand side, there is an Add button. And in that Add button, you now have the capability of adding those different assets. Again, there's those 4 assets I was talking about. A building, equipment, furniture, and property. So again, you can onboard each one of those. So for example, if I want to be able to add a new building, click Add, click Building. Comes up with a pop-up dialog box with essentially the Building Edit window. And that is all our fields that are from the edit capability of adding on our buildings. So you're going to be able to fill that information out. As you fill out those items, you hit the Save button and it adds it into the inventory. I'm going to just close that window down. You can also add other items such as equipment. You come inside of here, add your equipment in, and again, gives you that capability of adding a brand new piece of equipment. So again, if you're onboarding new assets like equipment, furniture, buildings, and so on and so forth, you can use that add functionality to be able to fill out the fields of information concerning that asset in order to add it to your repository. So again, the add functionality is available to you here with those 4 different characteristics. Once you onboard a new asset, so hypothetically, for example, if I come inside of here and add a new piece of equipment, it starts adding it to your Asset Registry grid panel inside of here. You'll notice that the grid panel will load all 4 different types of assets, and you'll see inside of here. For example, I'll see my buildings. If I scroll down a little bit further, I should see equipment and furniture and so on and so forth. So you're going to have all the 4 different assets. If you're looking for something in particular, like an equipment, you can use your smart search engine in order to restrict those pieces of equipment to those specific assets if you want to. Inside of here as well, as you do onboard them and you do make changes to them and you want to be able to edit that specific piece of equipment, there is an edit button inside of here. So if you make a mistake or you're not done, you can at least get the initiation of that asset inside of there and be able to edit with the edit button and still edit that information inside of here. So here's a good example. I just hit the edit button and I get those same fields of information as I did in the onboarding process with that edit in case things change over time or if you're not done with the data entry process. You can still get back to those fields by using that edit functionality. So I'll just close that window down. There's also a profile window. I can click on the profile window. What it does, it loads up essentially a read-only format. So if you just want to go in and review some of the information concerning that asset, again, it's just a quick profile, allows you to go up and be able to look at that information specifically. So that's a really good example. So again, I'm just going to close that one down. And obviously you have the grid. The grid also houses houses a series of information of fields that are from that asset specifically. Now, inside this console, Archibus has added to each one of these, or many of these different panels, a little gear button over to the right. And again, I'm going to rinse and repeat this a couple times across the console. So as I click on this little gear button inside the actual panel itself, I do have the capability of selecting what fields that I want as an individual user. So for example, if you're using a specific criteria, i.e. I want the manufacturer or model number, I want the cost to replace, or what city it is, and so on and so forth, I can add that in quite easily by being able to click on that value, double click on it, brings it over to the actual visible fields that are going to show up inside my grid. Be able to take that and I'm going to select that and be able to move it where I want. So here, for example, I'm actually going to move that right up front because it's an important piece of information for me. Right up to the beginning there. So I'm going to update that accordingly. Once I hit that update button, my grid will now change for me and add in that field that I want. So now I have what city that corresponding asset is located in. And again, any of those fields inside that Select Fields dialog box are now capable of adding into that asset registry panel for you. The beauty of that as well is that's a user by user basis. So if I sign out of this product, sign back into the product tomorrow, and start using this asset console, it should also remember that when I log back in tomorrow. So it's really nice on that, and you can do the grid and be able to lay it out for your own purpose or turn things off. For example, site code hasn't been filled out, we never use it, and I want to turn it off. You can go in and turn it off accordingly. So again, tailoring it to your own business process, to the fields that you require as part of your user management. Now, as you start adding items inside of here, let's go back to the top. We've got a filter console across the top. So as we have a lot of data loaded up inside of here, I can then search for specific pieces of data. If you want to validate whether it's already in the registry or not, i.e. you're looking for something, you can use your filter console across the top to be able to restrict your asset registry down below. So for example, if I'm looking for a specific city, maybe I'm looking for all the assets that are in Philly. And I can specify that. So I can specify city or any locational information, organizational information, as well as asset types. Maybe I'm looking for a specific type of equipment or a specific type of asset and be able to fill out your filter. Once you do that, you hit the filter button, loads up the asset registry panel down below with the restriction of your data in your filter console. And now I can see that I only have equipment from Philly inside my asset registry. So it does that filter restriction. So it's nice if you're looking for a specific data set or specific type that you're looking for based on that filter criteria. Once you get those entries inside there, you'll also notice that down below, you've got two panels down below. You'll notice that the map, the GIS integration map, directly drives into that asset location based on the values in which you're dealing with. Also, it's also interactive as you start clicking on the different assets. So I'm going to click on an asset code inside of here. It'll also load up that asset on the map to show you exactly where that asset is located. So if you're jumping, for example, from a building to a building in different locations in different cities, it'll zoom out, zoom back in with a map for you based on those characteristics. So again, mapping capability. This again will only work if, for example, you've geocoded your facilities and geocoded your information, which then is able to look up the lat and long into the Esri product and load those maps for you. As well as this does require an internet connection in order to communicate with the Esri online web services as part of your Archibus product. Now over to the right hand side, we have the asset summary by type. Inside of here, it's really nice. We get a description of our different assets that we have. For example, if I clear out my filter console, just to give you a use case here, and look at all my assets globally, or maybe I'm looking at all my assets in a particular location if I want to, I can see how many assets do I have in each one of the different types of assets, what's my total depreciated value, market value, and replacement cost. So you can start taking a look at, if for example, what is my value today, and take a look at that. So 2.4 billion worth of assets, and then in order to replace it, what's my replacement cost, and so on and so forth. So again, gives you a high level. This will also change based on the restriction. For example, if you're looking at a city or a particular building, i.e. I'm looking at a replacement cost for a particular building, I'm going to put my building inside the filter it down, and then I can look at my total assets for that building as well as my total value contained within that building. So there's a good example. Obviously, I have to fill out the building information inside of here. So I'll try another building inside of here. Maybe I'll try a city, might be a bit more relative. So we'll try Philly. Again, if I'm looking for all the assets in Philly, we're looking to get out of Philly, we're moving to another city. I want to know how many assets I have in that location. There's a good example. I've got 8 buildings, total amount of aspects, and my total cost associated to that. So here's the amount of assets I have in Philly as part of that workflow, and that would be a really good example. So again, as you start onboarding your assets, it's going to take some of those values. Some clients ask me, well, how do I get the depreciated value? Well, you have to go and use the depreciation functionality inside of Archibus. Again, if you're looking to backfill that information, if I go back to my navigation system, you come out of the asset manager aspect, you go into the depreciation section, and follow through the depreciation steps as part of that workflow. As you do that, then this depreciated value starts getting filled out once the software calculates what that depreciation value is based on the characteristics in which you put inside there. So if it is 0 for you, that's why it's going to be 0. You have to go back into the depreciation methodology and make sure you depreciate your assets properly in order for that summary to come up with those values. Obviously, rinse and repeat that. Market value, you'll have to dictate each one of your different assets with a market value as well as a replacement cost as well. So if you don't fill out those 3 values, obviously the pivot won't work for you, and it'll all be zeros accordingly. So that's that bottom right panel as part of that. In the top panels, before we actually flip to the next tab inside of here, there's one more function inside the top right, and that's the reports button. So inside of here, once you get your items and get them registered in the asset registry, again, you can do it inside of here with the add button, or go back to the asset registry console and be able to add it there. Once you start getting some of these assets inside of there, you can use your report capabilities and be able to pull your reports out of here. As you can see, each one of your different asset types inside of here will have a report subsection. As I click into that, there's 2 subsections in each. One is the main asset information. As I mouse over that, you'll notice many of the different reports that are available to you in the Archibus Navigator are now available to you inside this reports button. So you don't have to leave the console in order to go and fetch some of these reports for you accordingly. So again, you could have asset information, you could have analytics, and start diving into that. So if I'm looking at a particular piece of equipment, I'm saying, hey, what's the analytics of this piece of equipment? And maybe you're looking at it, and you have different parts of Archibus, and you want to start pulling in some of these metrics. A good example here is I've got an equipment that I'm on right now, and maybe I'm using a building operations aspect of Archibus, and I'm tracking how many failure points I'm doing, i.e. how much on-demand maintenance tickets I'm doing, and I want to just pull in that metric. So you can come inside of here and say, what's my equipment failure analytic based on my tickets that are inside the Archibus software in the building operations. Click on it, comes up with that report, and I can look right away for that particular piece of equipment that I have. As many tickets do I have? How much did I spend on it? And you can start doing those analytics based on the maintenance over time of that piece of equipment. Again, that's just one out of a whole gamut of reports in which you can pull up inside this console that are available to you. So again, don't forget about that. If you're trying to do some reporting capability, there's a fair bit of reports inside of here that allows you to go in and be able to add and edit information inside of here. Now, when dealing with that, there are obviously, when you onboard and be able to register your assets inside of here, you're going to have other things you're going to start considering as well. For example, diving into your warranties that you have or leases that you have inside of the software. And again, that's getting into the specifics of the different types of assets that you have. For example, I have a piece of equipment inside of here. I could edit that piece of equipment. And again, some of the aspects which you have are, for example, a lease code or a warranty associated to, or what vendor did you associate to it. So again, each one of your different assets can start tracking some of these lookups that you're actually assigning as child values to your corresponding pieces of asset. So again, those are available to you inside the actual assets themselves. So again, go through the different fields in which you want to be able to track inside there and be able to track your assets accordingly. So before I get too far, I did want to go through the equipment, essentially adding new equipment, some of the fields that are available to you as an example, and then we'll move on to the next tab accordingly. So inside of here, I've got a whole bunch of different equipment inside of here and be able to edit a piece of equipment. So I've got, for example, an air handler unit here. I'm just going to edit that air handler unit. Now let's take a look at some of the information that's available to you. So inside of here, there's many different tabs. So we're focusing on a piece of equipment. Again, there's many different assets that you have, but I'll focus on equipment in this example. Now, an equipment is essentially an asset that doesn't classify as a building or isn't classified as a piece of furniture. It's classified as an equipment. I have a lot of clients that track different types of equipment, whether it's air handlers, whether it's computers, whether it's just assets inside the software that are kind of generic in nature, and they call them a piece of equipment. To start with, you have an equipment code. Equipment code could be something generic, just like this one, an air handler unit 001, or it could be something like a barcode. So if you do have a barcode, you can put whatever that barcode is going to be inside of here and track that as a piece of equipment. Once you track that, I immediately be able to fill out the equipment standard. So this is where that lookup list to our equipment standard comes into play. So if I hit the ... you'll notice that the equipment standard list that we were talking about earlier is now available to you, and you can choose that piece of equipment type. So again, coming in, looking up that piece of equipment, if I'm looking for an AHU, again, if you use your nomenclature, I can find AHU very quickly inside of here and be able to select on that. So that would be a good example. So whatever my equipment code is, what my equipment standard is going to be. You also have a serial number. So again, we're getting into now the granularity of all these rest of these fields. All the rest of the fields are essentially, in my opinion, optional. You can fill them out or not fill them out based on your business process or your requirements that you need. So I'm going to go through them very quickly inside of here. We'll go through each tab, and then we'll go into the next Lifecycle console tab. All right, starting at the top, you got serial number, just a basic serial number. If you know what that serial number is going to be, it's a free-flowing text field off the actual device itself, and be able to fill it in. Equipment status, there's a whole bunch of statuses inside of here. This is very helpful. For example, did you take the piece of equipment, put it in storage? Are you looking to sell it and dispose of it? Did you dispose of it? Did you sell it or did you dispose of it? Again, where's that status accordingly? So that's the pull down values that are available to you. Obviously in this one, it's going to be in service. I just onboarded it, bringing it in, and be able to fill it out accordingly. Pending action, this is if you're diving into a disposal process. So if you want to start going in using your disposal process analogies, this is where the disposal console really uses a lot of these fields for you, but you can manually use them yourselves if you want to. So if you just want to say, you know what, we think we need to dispose of it and I want to mark for disposal, you can use those actions if you want to. But again, that's really the focus of the disposal console to track that for you. Criticality is the next one. How critical is this piece of equipment? If it goes down, what's the criticality? Or if you're dealing with the life cycling management of your equipment, which ones are the most important pieces based on your replacement or your considering of life cycling aspects inside the products? So this is where you can identify whether it's critical or not. A lot of clients use, for example, a 1 through 10 sort of number in order to represent that criticality. So again, if it's high or low, you can put what that critical high or low aspects are inside there. Again, if you're not interested in that criticality, you don't have to fill it out. Just leave it as 0 and just not use it. The next field is the date of last status change. For example, if you come inside of here and be able to update your information inside of any one of these different tabs inside the asset, you can actually come and track that date. Again, it gives you a nice little lookup, a calendar pop-up, and you can specify what that date is. This may be something as part of your business process. When was the last time you actually had a status update on this piece of equipment, and you can track that accordingly. Next field is classification code. Classification code is a lookup. It's a validating field. Inside of here, if I hit the ... comes up with my classification system. This is coming back to your classification in which you've entered inside the product, and now I can choose that classification accordingly. So for example, if it's a piece of maintenance equipment or a particular type of equipment, I can come down and be able to classify that into my classification aspect. So again, choosing what that classification is. As you choose that classification, as I choose on it, it drops in what that code is accordingly for you. So again, that may be a very helpful item for you to track based on the individual piece of equipment. If you find that's very extensive and you just want to do it on the standard, again, going back to the standard table and do that on the equipment standard instead of the individual assets if you want to. So you can do it by either method. Again, depends on how granular you need to go based on your equipment that you're tracking. Salvage, yes or no. So it's just a pull-down list, again, indicating whether you've gotten rid of it and be able to salvage it at that point in time. Subcomponent inside of here, you'll notice there is a select value dialog box. As I click on the ... it allows me to be able to choose a value. So here, for example, if I pick a value, that list that shows up is other pieces of equipment. So you can actually associate one equipment to another piece of equipment if you want to inside the software, which then has a subcomponent or a sub piece of equipment if you want to. It really comes down to how granular do you need to track. Do you need to track the parent as a whole unit and then be able to track its child components as well? And that's where you can actually come inside of here and select parent-child relationships. Now, for a lot of clients, you have to be very careful on this. A lot of clients get excited over this, but when dealing with the Archibus product, you have to be careful in the outcome of what you want to do with that sort of association and why are you tracking that. So if, for example, you're using the asset repository to track a granular component, do you track the parent as well as the child or just the parents? I always say track the mechanism in which you want to report on inside the software. If you want to be able to report on your assets at the macro level, just track them at the macro level. Don't bother tracking the parents. Or if you just want to track the parent, i.e. you just want to track it's a system or a unit itself, just track the units itself. Again, think of many different components, your reporting requirements, your maintenance requirements. As you take those subcomponents out inside that, you have to now maintain it in the disposal process, and the onboarding process is part of that. So again, really think that through. You can leave it blank just like that if you want to. I have a lot of clients that just don't use that capability because trying to report on it, trying to roll up numbers, trying to eliminate out the parents or the child's based on your reporting requirements has to be done. So again, think of that all the way through. If you are going to do it, my recommendation is just do a test case. Try a system, try a unit, try a parent-child relationship. See how it comes out in the reporting structure in which you require as part of your business process prior to committing your entire inventory to that. So that would be a high recommendation for you. All right, let's keep going. Additional comments. Again, if there's any other comments or fields that are not available, nice big free-flowing text field that allows you to store a lot of characters. Survey comments and survey photo. This is dealing with the mobile product. If you are using the mobile product, those are what those fields are used for. Again, there's a mobile process that goes along with that, so if you're not using it, you can ignore those two fields. All right, moving along. There's different tabs across the top. You got location and affiliation. So again, where is this asset located? Is it in a particular building, floor, room? Is it in in that room, for example, it could be basement. It could be a large basement. Northwest corner and the south side. Again, you can specify that based on a column located near. It's just a free-flowing text field, so you can come inside of there and be able to specify whatever values you want. Site building code, floor code, room code are all validating lists. You must have the site, the building, floor, and the room inside the Archibus software in order to use that. They are validating fields, i.e. I can look up that value. So if I don't have my room code, hit the ... and be able to select from that list accordingly. So again, room code 001, be able to backfill that information. So these are all optional. You do not need to associate equipment to a location if you want to. For example, maybe it's just a piece of equipment that's sitting out on the actual piece of land on the site, not particularly inside of a building. So you don't need to fill that building, floor, and room information out as part of that example, but you may just fill out site code and that's it. So again, depending on what your requirements are. Division, department, organization. So if you do track an organization to a piece of equipment, you can be able to fill those out. Bay located in, it's just a free-flowing text field, so you can fill that out just like column located near, same concept. Maintenance manual storage location, again, free-flowing text field that allows you to specify where that manual is stored if you want to. Tape to the back side of the north panel or something like that and specify that, or if it's in room 105 in the maintenance manual binder, for example. That's location. There's also usage across the top, usage information tab. Inside of here, we can track actually the usage of the actual piece of equipment. So again, if you're dealing with, for example, meter readings and maintenance aspects and limits, and as part of that, you can start filling out the usage inside of here. So for example, if you want to do a meter reading and you just had a tech that was up taking a look at that device, for example, or that component, then they can record when they come back down what that meter reading is. As well as there's a condition aspects, i.e. is it new, is it good, is it fair, poor. So again, some conditional criteria you can keep track of. Some limits accordingly, some metering units, what's the actual units, hours or miles based on that meter reading. Normal operating hours per day, is it on all day long? Is it only on for 3 hours? And so on and so forth. Years of life expectancy, is it a 10-year unit? Be able to fill that out accordingly. Moving on, dates tab. In the dates tab, you can start tracking some of the dates. When was the equipment manufactured? When was installed? When was put actually in service? Again, install, you may have installed it in the 1st of the month, but not turned it on until the 15th of the month. Again, being able to track those aspects. If you went out for a repair, when did it go for repair? If it went in storage, when did it go in storage? When the guy went up and you detected the meter reading, when did he do that? If you have it salvaged or sold, if I got rid of it, what are the date I actually got rid of it? So whether selling or getting salvage capability. Next tab is cost, purchase, and warranty. Inside of here, we can track when we actually purchased it, the corresponding information. Again, PO number, free-flowing text field, which allows me to put that PO number in there if you have track capability or if you have that information. Purchase price, what did I actually purchase it for? Being able to specify that. When did I purchase it? And so it's a date field and specifying that date field. Cost to replace, this is coming back to that pivot table that we saw earlier. If I want to be able to replace this, what is the cost to replace? So again, think about that one and how to keep that one up to date from year to year of your pieces of equipment. That may be a tricky value to keep up to date. Depreciation years and depreciation value. You can fill these out here as well as property type. These are three that are related to the depreciation concepts, or go in the depreciation part of the Archibus software and be able to fill those out and let the software be able to calculate out some of those values of the depreciated value out for you on your behalf. So again, you can manually fill them out if you don't have access to that subsection of Archibus by filling out how many years, what's the actual value, and what property type based on depreciation concepts are there. So again, those are three characteristics you can fill out. A warranty is next. A warranty allows you to be able to associate this piece of equipment to a very particular piece of warranty, i.e. it is also a validating list, which allows me to look up to that warranty table. Again, you must go back to the background data and fill out your warranties, list them off, and then you can start grouping your equipment to a warranty. It's a many-to-one relationship. I can have 5, 6, 7 pieces of equipment associated to a single warranty if I want to, and be able to associate that to a warranty code. You can only associate one warranty per piece of equipment. I cannot do a 1-year warranty and an extended warranty, i.e. 2 warranties against a piece of equipment. That's just a limitation. If you want to do that, maybe do an amalgamated warranty code might be a good example for that unified 1-year and extended together. So that would be a good recommendation. What vendor did you purchase it from? You can choose that vendor, be able to fill it out. It is a select value to the vendor's table. Again, your vendor's table must be filled out, and once you have that filled out, you can specify who you actually purchased it from. Lease number, same thing. So as we can associate that to a particular lease if we want to. The leases must be filled in the lease table, in the lease concepts over there. Once you have that, then you can start being able to choose that lease and associate that equipment back to that lease. So for example, if you're dealing with tracking printers, and you have a lease to that printer, for example, as an asset, and you can track that association if you want to. So again, lease code might be something you track if you're leasing your equipment accordingly. Service contract code, if you, for example, have a third party that's going out and doing your preventative maintenance on that piece of equipment, and you have a contract and you want to be able to associate that contract inside of Archibus, you can actually load all your contracts in the service table and then be able to associate that service contract to a particular set of equipment. So here, for example, I have my service contract. It is a lookup table to the service contract table, and then be able to associate many pieces of equipment to a single contract. So if you may want to track that. It is completely optional as part of that process. So again, those are our fields of information that are available to us against a piece of equipment. You're going to save it at that point in time. Once you save it, you've now updated that piece of equipment. Again, I put a lot of bogus information inside there just to showcase some examples. I'm just going to close it without saving it, but you have that capability. Again, that's available to you in the edit screen as well as the add pull-down menu underneath the add equipment as well. So both spots are available to you to be able to either alter or add your new asset accordingly. So again, I used equipment as an example. You have the same renditions with building, furnitures, and properties as well. Each one of those has their independent criterias, but again, I was focusing on just the equipment in this example. Alright, so that's essentially the Asset Registry tab, i.e. I'm trying to get onboarding my assets with this method and be able to track and trace my assets accordingly. There is also the Asset Lifecycle Management, so let's move over into that. I can click on that tab, and what that allows me to do is load up my assets accordingly and look at my information in the same characteristic. Just like we did before, there is a filter console across the top where I can hit that, or if I'm looking for a particular location or type of asset, you can put that restriction inside there, hit the filter, and it filters your list down for you. The little difference inside of here is if we've got a drill down panel on the left hand side. This drill down panel allows us to be able to choose values from the list in a tree based format. So here, for example, if I'm looking for Americas, US, and start breaking it down accordingly, I can start drilling down to my information. If I choose anything inside of any of this tree, so for example, if I click on Eastern or any of the others in the example inside of here, it'll load up all my assets that are associated to that location in which I choose. So here I'm going to pick on Eastern, and it's just loading and fetching all my asset information for me in the list. So here, for example, I've got all my buildings and my equipment, my furniture for that Eastern region, and gives me my totals. So here you can see I've got 1,423 assets in that Eastern region in the US. So that may be a really good example of being able to find what I'm looking for very, very quickly. Again, there is inside of this list, this asset list, essentially your asset information. You've got all your fields across the grid inside of here, which are available to you. Again, you can scroll right to get a lot more information inside of here. The grid is also editable with a little gear. You can add and remove your fields accordingly, so don't forget about that. If you don't like the list that's there, you can always alter it with the little gear and select fields criteria. Once you get the list open inside of here, you can do a couple different things inside of here. If you're looking for a particular asset, so for example, I've got a building inside of here, you can have 3 different buttons that are available to you, as well as clicking on the asset itself. So essentially 4 capabilities of selection inside of here. Right off the top, we've got the little gear inside of here icon. As I click on that, it dives into some of the other capabilities or other parts of the Archibus software. So specifically a project. So if you're dealing with a project in the project management aspect of Archibus, you can actually add an action that's associated to this asset to a project if you want to. And the idea is inside there is you're going to be able to make the asset-driven action. So be able to fill that action out accordingly and speed up that process. Because you may be able to do an action on a project. Maybe you're doing a line item inside your capital project or an onboarding or commissioning project based on that asset, and you want to add it to many different projects. Might be a good example. Create assessment or commissioning action. So again, if you're doing an assessment and I want to be able to add that into an assessment. So for example, if I'm prepping an assessment or third-party engineering firm to go out and assess aspects, and I want to be able to grab certain specific assets, I can create those different actions inside my assessment. Again, diving into the assessment or commissioning component of the Archibus product, and that's what that's used for. Create service request. I need to do a maintenance item on this. So whether it's a building or a piece of equipment or furniture and so on and so forth, going and initiating your SR process and dealing with that. Again, the SRs will follow their SLAs and go to the appropriate location based on your requirements, but essentially initiating that request. So i.e. I need to do an action. I just found out about something, and I can initiate that SR from this location if I want to. So those are some of the available aspects. Again, if you don't have the project management, condition assessment, or building operations or service desk components of Archibus, you're never going to use that gear as part of that. So that's what those are used for. So again, click the radio button, click OK, and initiates that action. So I'm not going to showcase those, but those are available to you. I'm going to cancel out of that. Let's take a look at some of the other fields of information. Edit button, profile button is the exact same as we saw in the previous panel. So here I'll hit the edit button as an example. This is where I can come inside of here, take that building, view all my fields of information, alter any of those fields. So again, just trying to keep my asset up to date as it goes through its life cycle. If things change, it just gives you the capability of making those changes and keeping that information up to date. Profile, same sort of concept we saw on the previous screen. Just calls up a pop-up dialog box with the attributes associated to it in a read-only format. So great for referencing if you've got particular pieces that you need to reference. Again, going in, viewing that information very quickly at a glance in a read-only format. Then you actually have being able to select the actual the actual asset itself. As I select that asset, you'll notice down below the lower panel now becomes active. It was kind of empty until I actually made a selection inside of here. Again, the selection I made in my example was for a particular building. So that particular building specifically was the BossMed building in which I chose. Once I chose that BossMed building, you then have the current activities, transactions, and ownerships associated to it. So here I can see for that BossMed buildings, I've got a bunch of work requests, and if I want to see what those work requests are, I can just choose or click on that value. It is interactive, and view what those corresponding tickets are. So again, this is going into the building operations aspect of Archibus. If you're not using it, obviously that's not going to be information for you, but that may be a characteristic of what's going on inside of that that corresponding asset and a good reference for you. Other aspects that are available for you is transaction management as well. So again, you'll notice that you're starting to run out of some screen space inside of here. You can gain some of that screen space by hiding things like the filter or the drill down inside of here. So for example, I can hide that filter by clicking on the panel button. It'll slide that out of the way. So I can do the exact same for my drill down here to get my screen space back. Again, don't forget your iframes. You can slide your iframes up and out of the way. You can also drag and drop these iframes. Drag and drop the iframes up and down just by mousing over and dragging it out of the way as well. So again, don't forget about that capability as well. So again, focusing down on this asset activities inside of here, transaction management inside of there, and I can see what transactions have gone on. So if you're making changes and you want to be able to track those changes and the history of those changes, you can come and be able to take a look at those. So again, that might be something you're interested in. Also, as well as what some clients don't know about is this asset transaction filters also fly out. So there's a little arrow button. As I click on that arrow, there's actually a filter, and you can actually filter on transactions if you want to. So it does have a filter. So if you have a lot of transactional history, there is also filter capability on this transaction history as well. So you can go in, view that transaction history accordingly, and be able to view that information. Last but not least is ownership. You can also take a look at the ownership transactions if you have ownership, i.e. do we own the facility or not, and be able to track that accordingly. So whether it's that particular building or another one, we can see that this one is probably a lease facility because I don't have an ownership transaction in that example. If I did have an ownership, then I'd have an ownership transaction record inside of here and be able to track that accordingly. So again, that ownership transaction does come from the real property and lease module. As you start onboarding that in that location, the transactions starts being backfilled from that location. So again, if you're trying to get that to work, you'd go back to the real property and lease management subsection in the building aspects and use the wizards in that location to be able to create those ownerships. All right, let's move along. So that's essentially this tab, the Asset Lifecycle Management. The point of that is to try to keep your information up to date and view what's going on, i.e. how many activities I have, what's going on at the either location or that piece of equipment, so I can keep up to date on that. Also gives you the ability to start making some strategic decisions. So if I have a lot of work requests on that asset or that piece of equipment that I have, I can start taking a look at information associated to it. Is it getting close to its life cycle end? So if I click on the edit of a piece of equipment, am I getting close to that end of life cycle based on the install date? I can start taking a look at that. Did I have a lot of tickets over the past period of time? You can start taking a look at all those analytics. Again, some of those analytics are dependent, for example, the work requests on other domains inside or other applications inside the Archibus product, which are used to fulfill some of those metrics. So again, be careful with that expectation. All right, moving along. That's the asset lifecycle management. Last but not least is the asset optimization. The asset optimization allows you to start taking a look at your assets and be able to look at the analytics of some analysis that you can perform on some of your assets. So once you get your assets in there and you've got your maintenance criteria plan in there and your business processes to keep information up to date, then you can start looking at your optimization. So as I open that up, you can see that you also have the filter console across the top, just like we did before, and the drill down to the left-hand side as we did before. So again, same sort of aspect. I can fill out a city if I want to. So the example we've been using was Philly. If I click on Philly and be able to filter for my Philadelphia information, once I do that, it comes and restricts essentially my tree to just that location. You can drill all the way down, or if you want to, and be able to pick on that corresponding location if you want to, whether it's the country, region, site, building, again, depending how far down you go. Once I pick that inside the tree, then it loads up my information, loads up my map. If you have the Esri communication working, it'll show you that Philly, it'll show you the locational based information, as well as the actual assets down below. So again, I would probably get some screen space back here by hiding my filter out of the way and hiding my tree out of the way once I get narrowed down to my characteristics, and you'll notice you get a lot more screen space back to view that information a little bit more appropriately. So with that being said, once I have that corresponding graph open and I have my properties down below, again, drag that up a little bit and then be able to focus on my asset registry a little bit more. In my asset registry, I can now see my properties, my buildings, my equipment, and so on and so forth. They are essentially a flyout, so I can compress them all, and I can start taking a look at all the aspects I have in that location. and I can see I got different aspects. So if I'm looking at the equipment, I can use the equipment flyout and go just to that equipment and view all my information all contained within one tab. So again, really nice in that sort of capability to be able to view that information. Again, I get that profile button here as well and be able to indicate that. So nice little review list inside there. Again, don't forget, you got a little gear. You can choose your fields that you want to be able to see based on all your assets. So that's available to you here as well. Over on the right-hand side, you got some metrics over here. So at the top, you got your financial analytics. Inside of here, it gives you the capability of tracking some of these metrics accordingly. So again, Archibus tries to give you some out-of-the-box metrics, like a RONA metric inside of here, again, based on that calculation. I get a lot of clients asking me saying, well, what is that RONA calculation? Or if you're coming down here and seeing some of these other analytics, like the FCI and accordingly. So again, Archibus tries to come out with these out-of-the-box analytics. If you're looking for what that calculation is, go to the help file. The help file does dictate that RONA specification of what that is. Again, diving into what's the division, what's the factors, and so forth, where it's coming from to get that actual values accordingly. But as you can see, it does backfill those criteria, those analytics for you with both the current, the target, and the benchmark accordingly. So that may be a great analytic. Again, you're trying to figure out that location, what those analytics are, how well are you doing based on your assets accordingly. Down below, we also have the capability of taking a look at our organization. So if you assign your assets to an organization, as well as our criticality. So remember how the example I gave, we had our piece of equipment, assigning it a criticality. Once you assign that criticality, you can now start seeing the matrix of how many assets you have in what criticality. So if in case you have a high priority or high criticality, you can start taking a look at who has what criticality of what pieces of asset and start tracking that in a matrix. So again, some metrics for you accordingly inside there to take a look at that. Last but not least, risk analytics. So inside of here, so you can come inside of here and see what your FCIs are for a particular location if you want to, and see how well you're doing at that location. So that might be some analytics that you're interested in. Again, both the financial as well as the risk analytics to roll up those metrics based on your assets that you have accordingly. So those might be helpful for you if you are looking for some of those metrics. That's the location inside the Asset Lifecycle console that now takes those analytics and be able to give them to you accordingly. So that's the idea behind it. Now, as you start going through and start being able to manage your assets and keeping them up to date, obviously you're going to start being able to offload them and decommission them and get rid of your assets. Again, two ways in order to decommission. You can, one, either go back to the Asset Lifecycle Management tab and be able to take that asset. So let's focus on something simple like a piece of equipment inside of here. I'm going to get my filter console back. Again, the beauty of the filter console is you can find a piece of equipment very quickly in a very particular building. So maybe I know it's a piece of equipment in the HQ building, filter that out, find that piece of equipment that you're looking for specifically, and find it pretty quick. Or obviously use the smart search filters, whichever you're most comfortable with. And once I be able to find that asset in that location, and then you can go and be able to edit that asset. So for example, if we know we're getting rid of that, edit it right here, inside of here, and edit the information. So again, what am I doing? I'm salvaging. Yeah. Am I getting rid of it? Yeah, I've disposed of it or sold it or dealing with that. Again, don't forget about when you start offloading it. Again, location and affiliation. You may want to remove the location inside there. You may want to go in the date fields. When did you salve it? When did you sell it accordingly? And be able to specify those as well. So don't just go in and change the status, because you also want to change location and data information as well as part of that disposal process. A lot of clients ask me, well, does it get removed from Archibus? Does it get deleted? The answer is no. Assets never get deleted from the Archibus product unless you specifically go in and delete those assets. So unless you're hitting that delete button in the top right and deleting it flat out and all its metrics associated to it, it does retain inside the asset management tables inside that structure. So an asset never really gets deleted as part of that. Again, that's used mainly because some clients have a requirement for history purposes and it keeps now that piece of equipment and all the history associated to it intact inside the software. So that's really nice as part of that workflow. Again, be aware of that, because that status field, as you start going through many years of asset onboarding and disposing, that asset list will keep growing and growing. So again, you may use the equipment status as part of your filtration process or your smart search filters in order to run either reports or filter criteria. So again, keep that one in mind, but essentially you can dispose or sell off right from the Lifecycle Management tab if you want to. Alternatively, the other one you can look at is the disposal console as well. So Archibus also has built in some disposal process. So again, inside the navigation, the asset manager, if you go to the asset manager again, inside asset manager, there's the asset disposal console there as well. So you may want to look at that if you do have a disposal process in which you want to follow, to see if the disposal console might work for you as part of your business process. So that takes us essentially round circle through the asset lifecycle console. So hopefully that helps you out in order to be able to onboard your own assets, keep them up to date accordingly, and then dispose of them afterwards, and then run your metrics periodically from time to time. You also have the capability of running a whole gamut of reports. Don't forget about that in the top right, and be able to pull some of these reports either from the lifecycle itself or from other parts of the process that are also integrated into the asset lifecycle console. Obviously, those other aspects will be dependent on whether you have a license and are using those business processes as part of the Archibus product itself. And that concludes the session of managing the asset lifecycle inside the Archibus product. So hopefully that'll help you in your day-to-day operations, from being able to bring your assets inside the Archibus product, maintain it, and then dispose of them afterwards as part of that lifecycling. So hopefully you enjoyed that. That is the end of this video in the video series by Horizant. Watch for other videos in the video series. That's all. Take care, and bye for now.